Hey guys, so it's been a while since I made an Alice Cooper video to my channel, so I wanted to, start adding more videos about Alice Cooper. I'm been a huge Alice Cooper fan since 2000, so just wanted to show a recent purchase. This was probably a couple months ago actually, but I purchased Alice Cooper Inside Out Live 1979. This is part of the from the Inside tour, so I just wanted to kind of like just talk about that period of Alice's career. So this is the album from the inside. Let me take it out of the sleeve. This came out in 1978. It opens up like this. Pretty cool. And then the back. Here's Alice. And this was produced by David Foster, executive producer Shep Gordon. And here's the track listings on the back here if you want to. We'll talk about the track listings in a little bit, but here they are. So I always associate this. This was Alice's last album in the '70s, and you would say the '70s was Alice's, I guess, when he was most popular, uh, with the shock rock and all that stuff. And this kind of represents this was the last album of the '70s, and this was his fourth solo album. And in 1975, he came out with "Welcome to My Nightmare." '76 was "Go to Hell," "Goes to Hell." '77 was "Lace and Whiskey," and then this was the from the Inside. So before the album came out, Alice kind of like reached his point where he was drinking a lot, and he had to go to the hospital for his alcoholism. And it was pretty much, I guess, right after around the Lace and Whiskey tour. In between Lace and Whiskey and this album, he had to go to the hospital to seek help. And this is the concept album that came out of it, of his stay at, almost like kind of like being in an asylum. And the songs kind of represent characters that he saw in the hospital and stuff like that. So this is like kind of like another concept album. I do love the cover with the face of Alice and the makeup. It's such a cool classic cover that's been pretty much reused in other things in his career. But this is such a great cover. So we reached the point, in his career, that he had to, get some help, and then later on he would relapse again, and then eventually become clean. But this is the late '70s. I guess the touring catches up to the partying of a rock star catches up to, I guess, anybody really. The alcohol and all that stuff. Eventually he was going to break down at some point. So he came back with this album. As you can see, if you look at the eyes, there's a picture of Alice in the eyes too. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So why I say this is the last album for a lot of things, because this is kind of like the last album of Alice being Alice for a number of years. Because after this album, he kind of abandoned this kind of, I don't know what you would call this, maybe the Welcome to My Nightmare Alice, the Killer Alice, the kind of that gothic kind of Nightmare Alice, I would say, for me, with the makeup and this look. He would abandon that because the next album that he would come out with would be 2 years later, Flush the Fashion, and he would look totally different in the cover in this presentation of Alice, totally different, and he was like a little picture of what he looked like during that time period. But this is 1980, and we'll talk more about that period at some point. And I'm really interested. I think there's only a few Alice fans that are interested in this period. They call it the blackout era, where Alice doesn't remember recording the albums or going on tour. And I don't know how true that is. Maybe it's something that he says that because he doesn't want to talk about that period, because it's kind of like a dark period in his career where he kind of dabbed with cocaine, alcohol, almost went through a divorce and stuff. So maybe that's something that he doesn't really want to talk about. But I'm so interested in that time period. So this is kind of like his last album as being Alice. And then he would, make, what was it, like 4 albums from 1980 to 1983. They didn't really sell well. They're really good albums, though. For me, I like them, but for the mass like audience, I guess they didn't really accept him as, and unfortunately, in 1983, he kind of disappeared from the music scene, and only 3 years later, he came back as the classic Alice, and he's been the classic Alice since 1986. He hasn't like went away from that character in the last like 40 years. He kind of knows this is who I am. This is what the fans kind of expect. So that's kind of it. So this is kind of like the last album in the '70s, like I said before. So some of the things that came out. So the tour for this one was called the Madhouse Rock Tour, and so again, it kicked off I think around like '78 to '79. It came out. With it was filmed. One of the concerts was filmed for video. I have it on DVD. Actually, it's the Strange Case. It's called The Strange Case of Alice Cooper. It's again part of the Madhouse Rock Tour, and this is pretty cool. I just noticed, like, when I originally first became a fan of Alice, and I saw this concert, I wasn't too fan. I thought Alice looked very thin, and almost like when he was singing, he was like out of breath. Here's a picture of Alice in it, and you can see he's really, really thin. Sorry about the glare, but yeah, he's very thin. So for a second, I thought maybe is this before he went to get help? But this is actually after after his, when he went to the hospital and stuff. So we have this is I mean, you could probably still get this on Amazon. I got this on Amazon, I believe. But it's really cool. It also has audio commentary by Alice Cooper, so you can talk about it. Here's the set list: From the Inside, Sirius, Nurse Rosetta, The Quiet Room, I Never Cry, Devil's Food, Welcome to My Nightmare, $1 Billion Babies, Only Women Bleed, Norman Mr. Nice Guy, I'm 18, The Black Widow, Wish I Was Born in Beverly Hills, Ballad of Dwight Fry, Go to Hell, How You Gonna See Me Now, Inmates Were All Crazy, and then of course School's Out, ending the show. So this one, this tour included a lot of songs from this album. What do you got? You got From the Inside, Sirius, From the Inside, Sirius, Nurse Rosetta, The Quiet Room, Wish I Was Born in Beverly Hills, How You Gonna See Me Now. So about 7 songs. Inmates were all crazy. So you got 7 songs from the album. So really talking about the music industry in this period, late '70s. You could tell Alice was struggling. This was compared to the previous album, Lace and Whiskey. I think it's a little bit better. The music industry was changing, and it's hard to think of it back then because we didn't. Back then in that '70s, we didn't have MTV, and MTV had such a big influence on the music industry in the '80s, in the beginning of the '80s. But in the '70s, I mean, it was really like you had to get your songs on the radio, and then eventually you had to, make sure that the record stores were stocked with all your records and albums and stuff like that. That's why, singers back then or rock bands or they would come out with albums on a frequent basis. Every year they would be coming, or maybe 2 albums a year, just to keep their stuff stocked, in the record stores. So. And, in that time, it was like 77, 78. I'm thinking, now, I mean, I didn't live through that period. I only read stuff about it. But I think that was when, you had disco and Saturday Night Fever was like, the Bee Gees were getting the radio time and stuff. And that was popular. And, rock bands like Alice, they were not, might not have gotten, much sound on the radio and time on the radio. But so, and I'm thinking that's probably maybe the reasons why Alice, after this album, kind of decided to go in a more new wave kind of sound in order to compete and stay relevant to the changing music world, going into the, especially the early '80s. But for me, I felt like, compared to Lace and Whiskey, I felt Lace and Whiskey had a lot of ballads on it. They had, I Never Wrote Those Songs, You and Me. There was some other ones on there. You and Me. I Never Wrote Those Songs. I know there was another ballad on there. I can't think of it right now. But so this one also has kind of a few ballads on here. You have The Quiet Room. You have Millie and Billy. How You Gonna See Me Now? Those are kind of like the soft songs on here. Now, before we go into the other record, let's talk about current now with Alice's set list today, and does he include any songs from this album? You have to see a period of Alice's career, and it's like from 1976 to 1983. Alice doesn't really touch much music from that period in his set list. Of course, he does the early 70s with with his original band. So, of course, when you go to a concert, you're going to see the classics. You're going to hear the classics. 18, Billion Dollar Babies, Norman Mr. Nice Guy, Under My Wheels. So, of course, School's Out is going to always end the show. So he doesn't really, and of course, he has so many albums. It's going to be hard to, pick from everything. And just the concert would be 3 hours if you wanted, But, this time period from 76 and 83, I feel he doesn't touch much from those songs from that period. So I went to the concert many of them. I think the last Alice Cooper show I went to was probably back in 2009. It was called the Theater of Death tour. And he did sing From the Inside there. So I've heard From the Inside. I've heard him sing "Wish I Was Born in Beverly Hills" in the last. I'm saying probably in the set list in the last maybe like 20 years. He's played that. Notice Rosetta has been played. But everything else on here, I think the only songs in the last 20 years that's been in the set list, in his current set list, from the Inside, "Wish I Was Born in Beverly Hills," Notice Rosetta. Maybe Sirius could have been in it, but like all the other songs, have been kind of never been played live since this tour. So let's talk about this album. So I went to a record store again a couple months ago, and I saw this one, and I was like, well, Alice didn't come out with a lot of like live albums, but I definitely wanted to check this out. And it's kind of like they're trying to, it's kind of like the same almost kind of variation of this cover right here. I actually like this one a lot better. I like this because it's a little bit further back and stuff. So nothing fancy with the label or anything. It's it's a shame. I mean, too bad they couldn't put like pictures of the tour or something. This is what the album label looks like. Yeah, it's just too bad, it's just plain, it would have been nice if they had like the, pictures from that time period or album. So what do you get here? So you have, now this is not the full show, as you can see, it's not compared to like this one here, and you probably can't see it because of the glare, but I'll go over the songs real quick. So you have the intro, and then this is side A. The intro, From the Inside, Notice Rosetta, Quiet Room, I Never Cry, Welcome to My Nightmare, Billion Dollar Babies, Only Women Bleed, and then side B, Norman Mr. Nice Guy, I'm 18, I Wish I Was Born in Beverly Hills. It's Hot, intro, Go to Hell, How You Gonna See Me Now, and School's Out. So again, it's not the full show. They leave a couple of songs out. Like you're not getting Inmates Were All Crazy. You're not getting Ballad of Dwight Fry. But you get at least 18. Oh, you get 18 on here. So From the Inside, Nurse Rosetta, Quiet Room, Never Cry, Babies, Nice Guy. Well, you got quite a few. There's some songs that are not on here. It would be nice to have kind of like a complete show, but what can you have? But yeah, nothing here. So that's it. This is again, I was glad to add that to my Alice collection. Again, there's not many live albums out there that he has come out with, but definitely if you're a new Alice Cooper fan and you're just getting into, highly, definitely recommend. Definitely got to get the 70s albums, and you have to eventually come across this one, and definitely. And then again, this DVD, if you're want to see the actual concert, definitely. I like this concert. It's kind of like it's kind of like Welcome to My Nightmare. I think it was probably one of the best concert videos that he came out with. You know, all the theatrics and stuff. So this one's pretty good too because it's kind of like you know you have the new songs plus he brings in like kind of that Welcome to My Nightmare period of his career too. So yeah, definitely. I mean, I think this is again on Amazon. It might be streaming somewhere on one of those like streaming services too. But that's it. You know, thanks for watching.